I'm Zoe.
Hi, I'm Blake.
I'm Ash.
And our project is on Maranasati Buddhist meditation, which is the practice of mindfulness of death. So we wanted to answer the question, why is Maranasati still prevalent today? As the practice is a little shocking at first to see practitioners meditating on actual corpses. And so we wanted to look into how is this still practiced today. So to answer this question, we're first going to go into what is Maranasati, where did it come from, why is it important for Buddhist monks, and how it has changed over time.
So Maranasati Buddhist meditation is a diligent mindfulness of death through meditative practice, sometimes in front of decomposing corpses or skeletons. So this first showed up in the Satipatthana Sutra of the Pali Canon, which outlined the 9 stages of corpse decomposition. And going through some of these, the corpses blue and festering, eaten by crows, reduced to a skeleton, no blood, just tendons, no flesh, reduced to bone, rotten, come to dust. And there's a picture on the top right of 2 monks in front of one corpse that is like newly dead, and the other one is bloated and decomposing. And then on the bottom is a picture of a few monks in front of a skeleton. And this is actually a practice. As you can see, it was practiced in the past, and it's still practiced today. But the reason for it is simply so that the monk can recognize the impermanence of his body, and that realize that one day his body will be just like the decomposing corpse. So later on, the Buddhaghosa wrote a scripture in the 5th century Sri Lanka, and mentioned in the Abhidhamma Pitaka, in his writings, and talked about some meditation, specifically kasina meditation, which is different from something known as jhana, which means to burn up, which was one of the oldest words in Buddhist texts. It basically means to get rid of mental defilements, to gain liberating insight of the Four Noble Truths, to end suffering. And there are 4 stages of jhana, and one of them is realizing the impermanence of the body, and the repulsiveness of the stages of bodily decay, and also breathing. And that is, as we talked about, a big part in the Satipatthana Sutra. But as you can see, it's changed over time, since this was written a long time after the Buddha. The interpretation of Maranasati changed, and it was more concentrated on single-pointed concentration, as opposed to, focusing on mindfulness of death and getting rid of realizing the impermanence of the body. And this is a quote directly from the Satipatthana Sutra. The Buddha says, in this way, he remains focused talking about the monk. He remains focused internally on the body in and of itself, or externally on the body in and of itself, both internally and externally, or he remains focused on the phenomenon of origination with regard to the body, or phenomena of passing away with regard to the body, or on the phenomenon of origination and passing away, or is mindful that there is a body, is maintained to extent of knowledge and remembrance, and he remains independent, unsustained, not clinging to anything in the world. This is how a monk remains focused on the body in and of itself. And the depiction of this over time has changed, and so have the practices, but because there's been misinterpretation as it's spread. But this is basically talking about how monks practice Maranasati and recognize their impermanence.
So the next topic that we'll be covering is, why is it important for Buddhist monks? The Maranasati is a significant practice for certain Buddhist monks because of its connection to mindfulness and the inevitability of death. It all can agree that in death, it in itself is an important pillar of life. It is a bitter subject that most fear to think about in the practice of Buddhism, but it is a truth that should not be ignored but embraced and understood. Buddhist monks of all practices and geographical origins have some sort of connection to Maranasati, otherwise known as the mindfulness of death. In a more tame sense, the simple reflection of death and its processes on its own is sorry, in its process on its own accomplishes the goal of Maranasati. Larry Rosenberg, a well-known American Buddhist teacher who is pictured to the right, reflected on his own experience of the mindfulness of death, saying, "The contemplation of death has helped to take me through the ups and downs of practice. It can be an effective antidote of mental dullness we don't have forever." This form of Maranasati is more widespread, being practiced across the globe and not seen in horror or disgust, as compared to the more physical practice of this form with the corpses. Despite this, the more heavy and controversial form of Maranasati also prevails among Buddhist temples in Southeast Asia. Do the practices and views of these practices match that of the more PG version of Maranasati? In simple terms, yes, but as with all things, the issue is much more complex. As I spoke of mindfulness of death, for some it is an acceptance of the inevitable, but such acceptance is easier said than done. In the practice of Maranasati that we are studying today, monks take the task to reach this mindfulness as a step further, but by not only understanding through the mind, but also seeing through the physical. Monks meditate near decomposing corpses of humans to find a deeper connection to the non-permanence of their physical forms. As reflected in the Satipatthana Sutra, it says this body of mine too is of the same nature as that the body is going to be like that body and has not got past the condition of becoming like that body. What is being understood here by the author is that though they're seeing a corpse go through the process of death, he is able to better understand the process of death and life, as well as the overall cycle that is samsara. In conclusion, from the more tame to extreme, Maranasati is an important practice for both monks and Buddhists because of the connection one makes with death and how it should not be a subject of fear, but a subject to understand and contemplate.
So how has the practice changed over time? The practice of Maranasati has had more traction in the form of mindfulness of death as of recent rather than on-course meditation, and has garnered attention from modern psychology and those outside of Buddhism. While Maranasati appears early on in the Satipatthana Sutta of the Pali Canon, where practitioners are encouraged to meditate on death, it has taken the form of both meditation on physical corpses by monks and lay people in Buddhist practice, but also we are provided with 8 other ways to meditate on death as a concept. It is not practiced as often as other forms of meditation because most cultures do not typically encourage facing the reality of our own death so bluntly. It is human nature to react to dead bodies with repulsion and fear in general, and thus takes tremendous self-control to practice Maranasati. Journalist Larry Rosenberg asserts that there has been a recent uptick in the interest of Maranasati, and there has been more attraction to the contemplation of death rather than on corpses, even though the meditation on corpses is still practiced in traditional Buddhist meditation. And then this has also reached outside of Buddhist practice. Modern psychologists assert that Maranasati can have positive psychological impacts on the value that we place on life and our sense of morality. Additionally, by meditating on the concept rather than a physical corpse, the practice has become more approachable to the average person outside of Buddhist practice and just lay people in Buddhism in general.
So, in conclusion, returning back to the question at hand, why is the practice of Maranasati still prevalent today? As we said at the beginning, kind of going into this presentation, we really wanted to get a grasp of why such a bizarre and kind of extraordinary practice was not just prevalent, but like very respected and kind of spread out across not just the Southeast Asian region of this religion, but also across like more modern and um, different countries like the United States or Eastern countries. Uh, and
And we talked about where Maranasati came from. It came from the Satipatthana Sutra and the Abhidhamma Pitaka from the Pali Canon, and then it spread to Tibetan Buddhism as well.
Buddhist monks' devotion to Maranasati and understanding its importance to understanding samsara has been a major component to its prevalence in modern Buddhist practice. It is also important to make the connection that death is a major part of suffering, and understanding suffering is necessary to understanding or practicing Buddhism and understanding samsara's cycle.
So Maranasati can be approached in various ways that makes it more approachable to lay people, and has had, and modern psychologists have found positive psychological effects. So we believe that it is still prevalent today because while mindfulness of death is a challenge to a lot of our cultural norms, it forces one to confront their own mortality and attachment to life, which can bring about positive psychological benefits and does align with multiple Buddhist ideals.
And here's our works cited page. Thank you.